everybody. Welcome back to the next episode. I believe we're on episode 3. We're young'uns, aren't we? We're young'uns. Episode 3 of Composites Cast Monthly. And Nick here. Hello, ahoy, ahoy. And we've got Martin here as well.
Yep, I'm Martin, technical advisor for ECF Composite Supplies.
You forgot to say ahoy, ahoy.
Ahoy, ahoy.
We have to say that. I don't know why, it's just a thing. And don't forget, everybody, if you've got any questions or input, feedback, you can email us at compositescast@gmail.com. Okay, let's get started. And today, we're very privileged to have a very special guest with us. Ahoy, ahoy to Dave Johnson from Wessex Resins. Hello.
Hello, ahoy, ahoy to you too. It's a pleasure to be here, it really
yes,
is.
And it really is a pleasure to have you.
A wonderful sunny day outside.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah.
Be nice to be on the water.
Absolutely. If only.
However, here we are. So it's a special edition. We're not going to do our normal features, are we, Martin, this week?
No, we're not, no, because we've got David in, who is a wealth of knowledge on epoxy resins, polyester resins, all kinds of composites processes, all the way up to epoxy resin infusion. So he's an absolute wealth of knowledge. He's been special guest on a lot of seminars and held courses, and even done teachings at boatbuilding class academies. Yeah. So I think we can pretty easily fill up the full show. Just chatting to David and pick your brains and find out more about you. And I mean, how did you first get started? I mean, you work for Wessex Resins now, aren't you?
Yes, I've actually this next year will be my 30th year at Wessex Resins, but it'll represent nearly 45 years of working in the boating industry. Mm-hmm. You know, principally to start with in production glass fibre boat building. So of course you quite well know that, you know, to be involved in that, you have to be something of a chemist. Something of a textiles engineer, something of a creative spirit, you know, even down to moral support for the workforce, you know, encouraging all sorts of things, you know, and it's been, you know, it's been a privileged journey that I can only thank my father for, you know, for setting, actually me and my brother still works in the boating industry, but my journey has been, you know, phenomenal. It's been a variety, never a dull day, never a dull moment. You know?
And for the benefit of our listeners, what's your role now?
Well, at Wessex Resin. So again, that's been a privilege to work at Wessex Resin. You know, a family-owned business, responsible for manufacturing the major brands that are coming from America. That's West System Epoxy and ProSet Epoxy.
Right.
So my role there has been sales director and technical operations manager. Right. So, you know, that involves, for me and for the company, bringing some of the spirit of the company into a customer. And that might actually be distribution, like yourselves, some of our overseas distributors that are actually almost like a template for your business here.
Oh, okay,
you know,
that's interesting.
Selling to trade, you know, and I know you sell to trade. So, but, you know, without a doubt, with any kind of, let's say, a sale in this industry, it comes alongside incredible technical knowledge and ability to pass that knowledge on, you know. Yeah,
that's really important, isn't it? To get, especially to consumers who are not trade, who are not professionals, to impart the knowledge of how all this stuff works.
Yeah. So. I'm actually always amazed. There's a lovely customer that I see on the south coast that builds the International Moth, you know, very high-end Grand Prix racing boat, single-hander, but incredibly technical to get the best out of it. Right. And he always asks me, David, have you got any golden gems? Right. And I've always got one. I always seem to have one in my back pocket. Right. And it always amazes me that there is always, I mean, I myself, I'm striving to constantly learn about, about the composites industry, because it's multifaceted. You know, the materials are relatively similar. You know, if you look at, say, chop strand mat and polyester resin, you know, once the heart of production boat building, when it all started in the 50s, you know, the advancement in technology of, say, fabrics and resin systems has kind of peaked at epoxy and fabrics. But you've got similar kind of processing. It's dry fabric and liquid resin for wet laminating. It's dry fabric and liquid resin for infusion. You could very easily switch from one to the other and gain, you know, a massive performance advantage just by changing the tap to epoxy instead of polyester resin, you know, for production. I mean, that's not to say that production boats have their place in
it's all just plastic with stuff in it.
It's reinforced plastic.
Of course.
It's, I mean, it's simple. It's easier to understand the engineering when you understand a bit about wood. You know, wood grain. Wood grain. You know, the multifaceted role of chop strand mat. You know, it's multi-directional.
That's right. Yeah.
But then when you start to look at the wovens and the unis and the stitched, you know, stitched is kind of the pinnacle of strength for production glass boat building. But I you know, and honestly, this has filled my life up. You know, this whole topic.
It's never ended, isn't it?
I'm always tapping things.
Right. Okay.
You know, see what they're made of.
Yeah.
My wife, she said to me, "Oh, what do you want for Christmas?" I said, "I've seen this great book called The History of Plastics." She just went, oh my goodness me. Surely you want something exciting. No, this is exciting.
Well, they always say, don't they, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. I think even retirement, you know, I kind of see beyond, you know, working every day to some kind of... you know, involvement. I've got such a lot to forget. It worries me.
I understand you got started with a bit of forgetting last night, didn't you guys?
yeah, we had a few drinks last night. We actually had quite a few good conversations, and we said, I wish we had the mics here with us now, because this is just great.
We should have done that.
Yeah.
Should have done that next time.
Podcast in the pub.
Pubcast, why not?
Followed by the
not?
Indian restaurant. Actually, that was a very good Indian last night, so thank you for
South Shields is famous, you know.
It is.
We've got one. Every time people visit, they say, how can all these Indian restaurants survive? There's a full street, Ocean Road it is, full of curry houses, and every time we have reps over and we take them out for a curry, they go, wow, how do these manage to survive, and they're all competing against each other.
Absolutely. And before...
everybody loves a curry here up in the northeast. So.
I had an excellent ice cream on the beach as well.
Oh yeah, they're good,
Minchellas.
Yeah, very good.
Really delicious.
Yeah.
Lovely day. Lovely outlook over the North Sea, isn't it, as well, on that beach.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Especially when the weather's not too bad.
Beautiful.
Gets a bit grim in the winter sometimes. So, have we got some questions?
We've got some lined up, So, you know, I get loads of questions about epoxy, and you were just talking there about epoxies and polyesters being used with fiberglass. But one thing about epoxies is it's a really good coating resin. Yeah. As opposed to polyester, it's not a very good coating resin on wood. It, once the weather gets to it, it starts to split and peel and flake off. But I've known about epoxies being used for coatings quite a lot, and you were talking there about the different woods as well. Yeah. So I'm guessing different woods need different treatments before you can just use epoxy as a coating.
Yes, as a general answer to that question, yes. Any surface requires appropriate preparation. So we look at, say, sanding a surface to remove any surface contaminants or irregularities to prepare for a really good bond. Now, things like plywood, which is a great boat building material, actually it's a material that's now the focus of the so-called sustainability, which I prefer to call the wholesome to the planet approach that boat building is taking. Yeah. So plywood is great, build multi-chine or double-chined hulls very quickly, very easily. Add CNC cutting to that. You have, and then the design program, nesting the components within a sheet of plywood, your waste is minimal. Yeah. So with plywood, prepping it up, it will be sanding the surface because plywood tends to be slight eggshell finish on the surface. So you just break through that glaze by sanding. If you want a clear finish, you'd sand along with the grain. If you didn't, you were painting. Maybe sanding across the grain lifts a little bit more wood fibre.
Yeah.
Most woods require the same preparation, but things like teak, it has an oily nature to the resin in the wood. That really requires a different approach, and that approach would be to remove the oily surface with acetone, pure acetone, white paper towels, not cloths that you might have picked up off the workshop floor full of contamination, or a box of rags that might be full of fabric softener. Seriously,
Yeah.
you know, these are like finite things that if there's ever an issue, you have to kind of go through this process of analysing what has been used. It could be the rags.
Yeah.
So white paper towels, no dye in them, a roll of white paper,
Yeah.
pure acetone, which you sell here, clean the surface, sand it, clean the surface, and then you're ready for bonding.
Yeah, it's a good point. That I mean, I would never have thought of that, fabric softeners and different things. I mean, we use silicons, and we had silicons not curing purely because the guy who was using them was eating cheese and onion crisps, and it was the onion.
Yeah.
The ingredient they used for that onion flavour that was contaminating his master. That was stopping the silicon from curing. So it's amazing, how easily you can cross-contaminate, because at the end of the day, it is chemistry.
It is, yeah.
And you've got to be aware
I think
of
you were
all.
telling me, Martin, as well about a customer who had a problem. Was it with curing, and it was down to different temperatures at different ends of the workshop?
Yes, that was right. Yeah, pickling of a gel coat. That was a polyester layup, and he was getting a lot of in America they call it alligatoring.
Yeah,
and it was just because one end of the workshop he had the space heater, the other end was just a roller shutter, and it was during the winter, so they were warm in one end and it was cold at the other.
Yeah.
It
You notice that because you run courses here, don't you?
Yeah.
Whenever we run courses, our lab is our lab, or our tech room at Wessex Resins. It's heated at an exact 22 degrees C. Exact.
Yeah.
So that then when we do testing, it's all done at this exacting temperature.
Yeah,
but if you do a course at another workshop, you'll find somebody that's making something at one end of the bench, they'll have different cure characteristics to somebody at the other end of the bench.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, that kind of that workshop temperature. But maybe I'll come on to that in a minute. But just before we leave the topic of coatings, that's super important to not have any contamination in the workshop. So you know how silicone in a spray shop can completely compromise the surface. I understand that some of the car manufacturers that still have operatives going in to do the spray, they forbid them to use deodorant, because deodorant has silicone, I believe. I heard this story, but I remember a long time ago having a telephone conversation with a customer who was making canoe paddles, and he could not stop the epoxy from fish-eyeing.
Right.
We call it surface reticulation.
Yeah.
Some people call it painter's holidays. But some people, when you mention, does it look like lace curtains, they know exactly what you're talking about. Now, I had two instances of this happening. One was with a customer that I felt so sorry for him over the phone. I sent him some brand new material, a junior pack, small pack, and he still had the same problem. So I was on a trip, and I called by to see him, to see what he was doing. And I noticed in his workshop was a spinning wheel, spinning wool.
Right.
And all the lanolin off the wool would be airborne.
Goodness me.
And then that causes like a surface film, which the epoxy just won't tolerate. It won't actually grip to it. Had another one on a Thames barge where a guy was frying chips. And his description was it wasn't working. And you have to find a description for what somebody's seeing that they understand. And lace curtaining is probably close, or the surface opening apart. So that can be surface contamination can really compromise a really good finish that you're striving to achieve on wood. Because let's face it, if it's going to be a clear finish, you want something that looks like a grand piano. You know? That can be achieved, but it requires quite a good, appropriate approach. Heating is another thing. You know, you mentioned the space heater. You know, a diesel heater or a calorie heater will pump out 5 gallons of moisture for every gallon burnt of fuel.
Wow.
Now, if you're talking about two-part products, resin and hardener, the last thing you want to be mixing in is a third product in the form of moisture, airborne moisture, which will lay on the surface and also compromise your work. So we always suggest heating a workshop is just passive heat. You know, in the small space that we're in today, you know, about 10 foot by 8 foot, you know, you'd only want a couple of office blower heaters. One office blower heater would make a difference in here.
Because I remember a call a while ago, there was a guy who tried to elevate the temperature to try and get the epoxy to cure quicker after he'd applied it.
Yeah.
And it all turned milky white.
Yeah.
And that was down to, because he'd elevated the temperature, it was drawing the moisture out of the wood.
Yes.
And it was, the moisture was getting into the epoxy, and the epoxy, when it gets wet, it gets a kind of a white, kind of milky finish to it.
Yeah.
So can we tick off some of the stops on the route to a perfect finish?
A perfect finish, yeah.
So number 1 was prep.
Yes. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Without any contamination.
Yeah.
Temperature, environment, we've touched on. So not just temperature, but the moisture in the air as well.
Yeah.
What else?
I'd just like to tap into a phrase that I use for that. And it is very simple, and it's a really good one to remember. Extraordinary finishes do not come from an ordinary approach.
All right,
so if you remember, I mean, you know, if you want the grand piano, you've got to have the resource and the patience, you know, need a lot of patience and time to prep up to make that finish appropriate to that. It's possible. It's honestly possible. I'll give a great commercial plug now to our product, because one of the latest formulations we have is the 207 hardener, which has been reformulated to give a water clear finish.
Right.
Now mixed together with the resin, so 105, 207. It's now called clear coating hardener. It used to be called special coating hardener. And the difference between the older special coating hardener and the new one is the UV inhibitor. The old UV inhibitor in the older formulation gave a slightly amber tint.
Right.
The new one uses a more contemporary UV inhibitor from our surfboard resin. It's water clear. And that, combined with the resin, gives a really lovely low viscosity coating product that can be used with fiberglass sheathing as well, woven glass, for say rudder or centerboards on a boat, or sheathing on a mahogany or sapele or veneered deck. And 3 to 4 coats of that gives a really good grain fill, hard, super stable finish, ready, and this is the other thing, ready to accept a really good 2-pack varnish that then ultimately protects everything from UV. And that sounds like a long-winded approach, but you do all this in the off-season. That then gives you, on a boat, all your work in the off-season pays dividends in the sailing season, because you don't have to do anything. You have to go sailing, you know.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you're bringing the clear coating hardener, because I used to get quite a lot of calls from customers saying, I'm using the 207, but it's not a clear finish like what I'm seeing on videos. And I found out that they're watching videos from the States.
From America.
And America had the clear coating version, and over here it was just a special coating, but we still shared the same 207 description.
Was it often due to I can't think of the word, regulations?
Absolutely right.
Yeah,
absolutely right. You know, we're manufacturing for the whole of, Europe, the Far East, Asia, etc. All of the countries that are appropriate to our manufacturing area, and we're governed by the REACH chemical
Of
laws.
course,
We
yeah.
have to fall into line with those, which don't exist in America. They obviously have their own health and safety
Yeah.
laws, but we have to follow that, and that is why the earlier 207 was a slightly amber tint, which actually doesn't look unsightly.
Yeah.
The trouble is with it, the perception when it's mixed up is it's amber
Right.
in thick film. You know, your average mix will be, say, a minimum. It's a 3.5 to 1 mix ratio by weight. So if I'm using it, I use it a lot. I'd probably mix, the smallest amount I'd mix up is 35 grams of resin
Right.
to 10 grams of the 207 hardener. So that's quite a reasonable amount in the bottom of a mixing pot, probably coming up for 10 mil.
Yeah.
With the older version, that colour is quite graphic. And I think the perception is, oh, I'm going to put that on my lovely boat and it's going to be the same colour.
It would look more coloured in a pot, wouldn't it? Than
Yeah,
it would
absolutely.
spread out in a thin film.
In a thin film, the colour disappears. It creates a kind of tint to paler wood like cedar.
Right.
But honestly, the old product was exquisite. The new 207 is another gear up.
Okay.
It's even more exquisite. But it's great with sheathing as
That'll
well.
be great. That'll stop a lot of phone calls to me about the 207.
I hope so. Yeah.
So the other question I had, and I've actually just had this question fired at us this morning, would be the drop in temperature on the epoxy component.
Yeah.
It causes that kind of crystallisation.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of customers, when they have that, they think the product's gone off.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So we had that question yesterday, and another guy asked us today. We do everything we can to keep the epoxies around about 18, 20 degrees C.
Yeah.
But once it goes out on the courier's van, there's going to be a drop in temperature in the winter months, and it depends how the customers store it as well. So
It's like olive oil, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got olive oil stored in a pantry or whatever, it'll crystallise and...
Honey is the
Honey,
best.
yeah,
So if
it's
you,
a great example,
you know, with
yeah.
honey, you know, if the honey is in the bottom of the jar and it's quite old, you know, it does crystallise.
Yeah.
But what do you do with honey? You put it in hot water and then you've got your honey back. And very similar to the resin itself, to uncrystallise it, let's use that phrase, you simply put the container in some hot water. And the bigger the container, the warmer the water has to be, or the longer it has to be exposed to that temperature. And it does dissolve the crystals. This sounds like a sales ploy, but I can assure you it's not. But we use raw materials that have a very, very high purity. And the higher purity of the resin system is more susceptible to crystallising.
Okay.
yeah,
And that's partly why we're always at pains to address it. And you would think that with a brand that has now 55 years of heritage behind it, you might think, you know, it might be the misconception that we've got a 55-year-old epoxy formulation. It's actually tweaked without any change in performance or handling characteristics every time we can. So we're striving to make it safer. We're striving to make it a more efficient product. So that, I mean, it's one of the only epoxies out there that will cure down to 5 degrees C. You know? I wouldn't say you get the best results mixing at 5 degrees C, but you can do things that help you, like warming the epoxy first, that allow you to do work outside on your boat, for instance, in inclement conditions.
Yeah.
But you certainly can't store it.
You can't
at
store
5
it.
degrees C.
Yeah, so and I'll have to give credit to our lab and our chemists. The chemists assure me that it's associated with neither a too low or too high temperature. it's a fluctuation in temperature between low and mid. So it's a fluctuation in storage temperature, say between 7 and 11 degrees C, and it's that band that tends to lead to the crystallisation.
Yeah, because I've noticed it happening. It hasn't been freezing conditions.
Yeah.
Exactly the same when you use a comparison with honey. When you have honey in the cupboard at home.
Yeah.
Your home's usually at roughly about 18, 20 degrees most of the time.
Yeah.
But there is a time period where you might go to work, the temperature drops.
Yeah. What are the dangers, do you think, if you made a mix up with crystallised resin?
I would guess because it thickens up as well, you're not going to get a good dispersion of the hardener within the product, I would imagine.
Absolutely. You've got a couple of issues, really, is that the hardener won't actually reach inside the crystal. The hardener doesn't disperse or dissolve the mix. And is a really significant thing if you're using the pumps, which we think the pumps are the best way of metering this out for either the professional or the amateur, the home built DIY boat builder. We think they're fantastic, but if you get crystallisation in the pumps, then they will fail to deliver the correct ratio. Right. So it's not only the container that you have to warm, it's the pump as well. So what do you do with the pump? You take it, put it in a Ziploc bag, and put that in some hot water.
Right, okay.
Now that will disperse the crystals that are within the pump body. If you analyse the pump, it's very simple. It's got a ball bearing mechanism that's held in place by a spring, and the ball bearing is the valve on the upstroke. The ball just displaces slightly and allows the body to fill with resin. If there's a crystal there, as it closes down, it won't completely close the body, and so you get an off ratio mix. So they're the two things. If you try to use it whilst it's crystallised, you either have the pump break or dispense the wrong ratio, or you potentially be making a mix with quite hard crystallised plastic in the resin. So it's very important to store it efficiently. It's very important if you get crystals to notice them and do something about them.
Yeah.
I've got a related question.
Yeah.
How long does epoxy resin last before its performance degrades, if that is a thing that happens?
Say on the shelf.
Yeah.
I mean,
And what would the degradation be? How long would that take? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It makes absolute sense because on the containers, you'll see there's a use by date. Now that is 2 years from the moment we manufacture it. So by the time it reaches you here for the shelves, it's probably been like a few weeks since it was manufactured.
Okay.
So we do that principally because it's part of our quality control scheme. However, we do get telephone calls on our tech support line, almost certainly like the kind of questions that you're asked about the same topic.
Yeah.
And we say, well, it's likely that it will still react if you mix the correct ratio and you mix it for long enough.
Right.
But don't use it on your boat.
Right, yeah.
Use it for windowsills or something like that,
Okay.
Invariably, I mean, my findings, and these are my personal findings, but they're not necessarily... They're my personal findings, but I have an immense amount of confidence in the product that I've worked for.
That's fair.
And the product I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
I've got product that's quite old and I still use it, but not on my boat.
Right.
I've done a fantastic job recently of splicing some windowsills in that were rotten on a 1910 cottage.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And I literally took the whole windowsill out with the window still in place and spliced it back in without using hardwood. I used a softwood. I managed to get a section in softwood and cut it down slightly to size. That gave me more or less the same as the section that's there already. Glued it in, but I also coated it with 105 207, but with grey pigment in it.
Yeah.
which was a great base for the paint.
Yeah.
And that will last. I mean, I look at it and my wife thinks it's a fantastic bit of DIY.
Yeah.
But me as a boat builder, I think the scarf joint is the wrong angle. And I used a lot of microlite, our filler microlite in that.
Yeah.
And that was a fantastic job. That actually somebody doing the same work on the house next door actually asked me what I was doing. Their professional window. So what are you using there? Oh, it's a good old West system.
Yeah.
You can
What's
imagine,
your experience of that, Martin?
well, I was just going to say, you can imagine the amount of parcels we send out on a weekly basis. And
Yeah.
every now and again, something gets damaged, we get it back. We
Yeah.
can't sell it on.
Yeah.
So we've got a cupboard full of odd resins, some of them West systems. And I've
Yes.
noticed when it gets old, we've got stuff there. It's probably more than 5 years old, and I'm
Yes.
still using it.
Yes.
And the resin, the hardener's darkened. That's
Yes.
one thing I noticed.
Yes.
That the resin goes kind of like a reddish brown colour.
Yes.
But coincidentally enough, I've just finished a project repairing that mobility scooter.
Yeah.
And we use some old G Flex as a
Yeah.
kind of a prime and coat because
Yeah.
that sticks to ABS quite well.
Yes.
And then we backed it up with the normal West system.
Yes.
And then, like you say, added a pigment to it as a base colour to do the final filler with the with the 407 mixed in.
Yeah.
And that's turned out great.
Yeah.
It's solid. It's bonded well, and that's out of date product.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, the last thing I would expect anybody to do is throw this away. You know, you know, if it's really old, then we'd say just mix the resin and hardener together in small quantities and just dispose of it. But it's not recyclable. It goes in the ground. It'll live in the ground for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
In 1,000 years' time, people will dig it out and go, "What on earth were they thinking?"
Yeah.
Make something with it. Use it for something.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who lives in Yorkshire, and I gave him some West System product, I don't know, 10 years ago, and he used it to fix a lawnmower body that he couldn't buy anywhere else. It was like it's no longer available, and it was used by 2020. Yeah, he did a fantastic job. That discoloration, that's a really good thing to note though, Martin, is the discoloration of the hardener. You know, it will discolour the mix, but invariably as the curing process is initiated, actually the cured product doesn't have that colour.
Yeah,
there's something remarkable in the curing,
I noticed that,
the chemistry that dissipates that colour.
But as you said, as you both said, a great opportunity to pigment it.
Oh, yeah.
And use it.
Use it for something else.
That you need in, well, any colour really, isn't it?
Exactly,
You know, the pigment that we do, that very small range of pigments, they don't give any UV qualities, but what they do is create a great primer for something else. I've just done the keel on my boat, the ballast keel on my boat. I've just faired it all up, ground all the rust up. I used exactly the same format. I used G-Flex as an adhesion promoter against the cast iron, and then filled it with 105 407, then faired that super smooth, it looks like a bar of soap, and then coated it with grey pigmented epoxy, and it looks brilliant. And G-Flex is brilliant. G-Flex is really, to sum up what G-Flex is about, it's America's Cup adhesion and performance that you can buy in a chandlery shop. It's just stunning. Stunning adhesion and a degree of ductility which allows it to function with plastics.
It's one advantage it has over polyester because it's got amazing mechanical bonding properties to it. I mean, I came down to Wessex Resins. Must be over 10 years ago now when I first did the course with you guys. So I remember the setup. And we made the toolboxes.
Yes.
And I remember the demonstration you did. It was just it was plywood. The ends were bonded together with a fillet of I think it was maybe 407 or 406.
Just a butt joint, wasn't it?
And you demonstrated that there'd actually been no prep work on the wood, and I think you accelerated the cure in an oven that you had. You had some heaters there, which is usually not advised to accelerate the cure. And then at the end of the course, you demonstrated. I think I don't know if it was yourself or Hamish just kind of stood on the plywood. It was kind of like stood up on the floor in a kind of a triangle
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe
Like
that.
a roof.
Like a roof,
T-joint,
yeah.
a T-joint,
yeah. And you stood on it, bounced up and down, didn't break, and it took an absolute wallop to get it to break away.
It's probably the wood that broke, was it?
That was the demonstration. You showed how the wood, the ply was still stuck to the fillet. And it was actually the wood that broke it, not the actual joint. And it was an excellent demonstration of how good West system is.
Yeah, yeah. We actually do that demonstration at the Southampton Boat Show, and actually at the dinghy show as well. And if anybody's never been to the dinghy show in Farnborough, it's vibrant, and it's full of enthusiastic club sailors who are very industrious at fixing things themselves. And we do that demo, and it always causes wow.
Yeah. But you wouldn't be able to do that with polyester. The polyester would break.
Yeah.
Polyester's kind of chip easy. It's I think polyester's the great for actual full GRP builds.
Absolutely.
And you can do some bonding applications, but if you're going to bond something, I would recommend epoxy over polyester.
Without a doubt. We do a lot of work with yacht surveyors, and they all recommend epoxy be used for a damage repair or maintenance associated repair. And then we get questions that say, Southampton, I've got a bow thruster I want to fit to my boat. I've got a teak deck I want to bond to my boat. I've got a rudder that I need to take off and renovate. And West System epoxy is just so appropriate. It's easy to buy in small quantities. That's a big advantage. They can buy it mail order from you and expect it the next day.
That's right, yeah.
The amount of people at my yacht club who buy from you and they say, that's fantastic, I ordered it on such and such an afternoon, it was here by the following day.
You've got the quite handy little 610 cartridges as well. They're great, already thickened epoxy, and it just mixes down the nozzle so you don't have to mess about with.
I remember seeing a movie, a Hollywood movie, I'm sat here trying to remember
exactly what you're going to say,
where they whip out a West System repair kit, and I think they're in a boat or something.
It was Robert Redford. It was Robert Redford, and the film is called All at Sea.
Right. Yes.
And he miraculously hits a container.
That's right. Yeah.
On the stern quarter of the boat. I mean, no discredit to script writing, but if you know about these things. But as far as product placement, wow,
it's unbeatable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Could you get any better than that?
Yeah.
It's remarkable. There he goes. I've got a hole. What should I reach for? Not toothpaste, not Weetabix. West System.
Yeah,
it was straight there.
Brilliant.
There's another movie, Interstellar. Do you remember that movie? Anyway, it's a space film, right? And inside the spaceship, there's a load of these sort of moulded shapes that look familiar.
Yeah.
So I looked more closely, and they're life raft containers that these guys made.
From you?
Yeah, how they got them, I don't know. But they're in space now.
If you're looking for
in
it.
a movie,
I actually remember a conversation. I think it might have been yourself that mentioned it on the course years ago. It was amazing how these memories stick in my head, but I'll forget something from yesterday. But you were talking about someone who actually didn't have any fillers. And you were saying you can use anything that's totally dry as a filler, as a temporary filler, at least anyway. Yeah. And I think the guy had used was it oats?
It's Weetabix, actually.
Was it Weetabix?
You just reminded me of that story, And so we had this phone call from somebody, I think it was in the Caribbean. I didn't take the phone call. Actually, Hamish, who answers, he's an absolute diamond on the tech support line and tech info email thing that we have at Wessex Resins. He said he had this phone call from a man in the Caribbean where his boat had gone onto a reef and got a hole in it, and he needed to repair it there was a tidal situation on this island, and he said he needed to repair it before it floated back off again. And Hamish said, well, have you got any filler to do this? And he hadn't. But he got some Weetabix and he scrunched up the Weetabix, mixed it with the West System epoxy, and effected a repair that was good enough to get him. We wouldn't recommend that, but in an emergency, it's a surprising what a desperate man will do, armed with a tube of glue or some.
You just imagine him on an island now. Have you is there any coconuts? Take the fibres off the coconuts and put that in as well.
Yeah, make a boat from them.
Questions. Let's see if we've got any more questions. One of them was I was actually going to touch on the subject of why an epoxy bond would fail, but I think we've kind of covered it. Would be contamination. Unless there's anything else we can touch on that.
There was something we touched on earlier on about heating,
Yeah, where the resin kind of turned cloudy.
Yeah, and we talked about actually accelerating the heating as well. And really with wood, talking about coatings with wood, then that's so important to have workshop and component, So workshop, component and epoxy should all really be roughly around the same temperature.
Right.
Yeah. If you apply warm epoxy onto a cold surface, it'll immediately thicken up. So the qualities of brushing are lost. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you apply cold epoxy to a warm component, particularly wood, it'll outgas. And by outgassing, we mean that the wood, which contains lots and lots of lovely little hollow fibres, also contains quite a lot of oxygen or air, let's say air, and that does expand and contract with temperature. So the worst thing you can do is apply epoxy onto, say hot epoxy, warm epoxy onto cold wood, because it'll expand the air, but also an accelerating temperature in a workshop can create air bubbles. I'll give you a great example, because I always relate back to examples on the telephone again, on the tech line. I had a phone call from a guy that had sheathed and coated a Canadian canoe over the weekend, and he said it got a beautiful finish, probably one of those Ted Moore's canoe craft plans, lovely sweet lines on these Canadian canoes, and I could just imagine how it was his pride and joy. He got to the point where he was going to coat it and sheathe it, and he thought, it's a really lovely sunny day, I'll move the canoe out into the sunlight.
Right.
So he coated it, sheathed it, it's all brilliant. He said, I went and had a cup of tea, and it was covered in 50 pence piece size air bubbles underneath the sheathing. Now, of course, if that happens underneath the glass sheathing, the air won't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So it creates an air bubble on under the sheathing. And of course, he phoned on a Monday morning after doing this work over the weekend, Saturday or Sunday, and he was heartbroken. And I could only sympathise with him and provide moral support, because the answer to get the finish he wanted was actually to strip it all off.
Yeah.
Now, in some respects, it'd be so satisfying if people phoned us on a Friday before they were doing the work, rather than Monday, and a typical Monday, honestly, we really do have an armoury of literature that anybody can read. It's on our website, it's on your website, You can send out the user manual with any order, it's all there.
But and I have to mention, these guides used to be printed out in a booklet form.
Yeah.
And you used to charge for them.
Yes.
And but now they're free.
They're
online.
free.
All
They're free.
on our website, and it's free on them.
Yeah, all these user manuals are free.
Even the Goujon Brothers hardback book on boat construction, which used to be £60, is free online.
Yeah.
It's a
it's
big old
brilliant, isn't it? It's
download,
brilliant.
but it's a great source of reference, isn't it? And the sketches are brilliant. But one of the questions on a Monday will be, the phone will go probably around 8:32, and it will be, I've used your epoxy over the weekend and it didn't work. And that might be the phrase, it just didn't work. And the question will be, well, how are you metering out the mix ratio? And I've heard, I used spoons, teaspoons, which is okay if you get, if you're pretty accurate, bit vague. I've used syringes.
Right.
I guessed it. I can't guess 5 to 1, and I think I've got a bit of expertise. Don't guess it. But the question sometimes is, I used the pumps. Now, if somebody's used the pumps, our response to that will be, how many pumps of resin did you use?
Yeah.
And if they say 5, you know what's coming next.
Yeah.
They've used 1 pump of hardener, and that's 25 to 1.
Right.
They're depressions of each. And if you look at the pumps carefully, they are actually, you can see clearly they're calibrated.
Yeah.
You know, you've got a short stroke on the hardener pump and a much longer stroke on the resin pump. They are calibrated. So 1 depression of each gives you the right ratio.
That's right.
But they've read into it, and it's 5 to 1.
I've heard that before. as
Yeah,
well.
I've had the same question, and
Yeah.
you kind of feel sorry for the customer.
You do.
Because they get the pumps, but they never read the instruction manual.
Yeah. You know, from my point of view, the last thing I want to listen to is anybody that's had a problem with our product. I try and rectify it, you know, with all my heart.
Yeah.
But actually, when this has happened, the only thing you can offer is moral support, you know, sympathy, because actually to strip it all off is a nightmare. You know, and again, that should be the phone call on a Friday. I'm thinking of doing some work over the weekend. Is there anything you can advise me? Have you bought the pumps? Well, make sure it's just 1 depression of each. Give you the right ratio.
Talking from my level, which is a complete non-expert level, I look after the website and things like that, so I know nothing about the product really. Only what I've picked up from listening to experts such as yourselves. And one thing I've learned is the level of misapprehension in the general public about how these products work.
That's right. I mean, I normally find that people who use epoxies for the first time, they've normally used polyesters.
Right.
And polyesters, yes, you've got to get your ratios correct on those, but they're a little bit more forgiving.
Yeah.
So you can, you know, if you experience with polyesters, and I do it myself, you'll measure out some polyester resin. If you haven't got a measuring device, you can kind of guess. And it'll still cure.
Yeah.
But with epoxies, it's a lot more accurate.
Yeah.
And I think I have heard that phrase, what you were saying, where somebody's said, "I've just put a dash of this."
If it's cold,
Right.
I'll put a bit of extra.
I'll put a bit more in.
Actually, if you do that, you'll inhibit the cure.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, with polyester, the manufacturers do set 1 to 3.5% of catalyst by weight, don't they? So there are guidelines.
There are guidelines, yeah.
But with a bit of experience, you can work outside of those. But with epoxy, it's got to be accurate. People will say to me, "What's the tolerance on the accuracy?" I say, "There's no tolerance," because I have to. It's got to be accurate. You're talking about confidence, aren't you? Really, the confidence in using it.
Yeah, to a certain degree.
Do you know how I
definitely.
come back on that? I say, well, if you never used it before and you're going to do something on your boat, why don't you mix some up and have a try on a piece of scrap plywood?
Definitely.
1 pump of resin and 1 pump of hardener is a total of 24 grams of material. It's not much. And actually, if you've seen our demo at the boat show, why don't you have a go at doing that and give yourself the confidence? It's all part of a journey of learning, like learning to sail, learning to drive a car. It's no different. But actually, once you get it, you can do things with West System epoxy that this is really sounds cheesy, limited purely by your own imagination, and the projects that we get are astounding. And I'm sure you find on the line, on a Monday morning, it'll be, I'm thinking of making a carbon fibre race boat. There's some of the questions we get. So it'll be a professional grade. I'm building carbon fibre sailboats, and I've used your product before, but I'm looking for this specific technique and a specific adhesive. The next phone call will be from somebody restoring an 18th century gaff-rigged cutter, traditionally built, and they want to use G-Flex within that. The next question will be, I'm restoring a historic violin. The next question will be a listed building. It'll be.
I've just had one there.
Yeah.
I'm building a giant mushroom.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Well, it's fascinating.
One of the customers we deal with, there's a beautiful facility down in East Sussex.
Right.
I think it's East Sussex. It's called the Weald Downland Trust, and they've got a collection of historic timber frame buildings that they They have bought from local. They've actually been gifted by local authorities. You know, where a road has gone through. They've carefully taken them to pieces, chalked numbers on them, and they've reassembled them down in this. It's almost like a village. It's beautiful, and I've been down there several times, and they use West System epoxy throughout for restorations, even to the extent, and I think this is beautiful, to maintain an older building. It's kind of essential to use these modern materials because you maintain more of the original. You could end up with just a few wood plugs that are original and the rest is brand new oak timber, you know. But they'll very carefully slice a veneer of rot off an old beam and glue that onto a new oak beam. And you won't notice it's there.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, that's magical, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's magic. And it's a way of restoring something from another era that actually has more than financial value to it. It's just...
Of course.
We've done work with the North East Maritime Trust just along the road. And I think you guys sponsored an epoxy.
We did.
Have you been along, have you?
Oh, well, the last time I was here, I went there because Lee and Gary suggested that we go there. I was with Robin from Marine Industrial. And we went and visited.
It's amazing some of the work they've done.
Yeah.
Restored all lifeboats and...
Yeah. Because, I mean, you know, this part of the country has amazing heritage in boat building. And you know why? You're so close to the Vikings.
Yeah.
You know, and you can see that in the shape of the hulls of the working boats. They've got Viking heritage through and through.
Yeah. So, I think we filled quite a...
Unbelievably, we've nearly done an hour sat here talking. Would you believe it?
It's gone like 15
incredible.
minutes.
We've easily filled an SD card there, I think.
Honestly, this is such a huge topic.
It is, yeah.
It is.
It feels like we haven't talked about anything yet.
No.
Yeah, we just kind of scratched the surface, so we might have to have you along again.
Ask me about carbon fibre composites. You know, ask me about many things. This is a topic that's for want of a better phrase, floated my boat since I've been working.
Come back again.
Yeah,
we can connect you by phone as well.
I'd love to.
So if we get any customer, let's do a phone one day. But if we get some customer queries in or whatever, we can do that.
Definitely, without a doubt. Yeah.
But yes, thank you so much for coming along.
I've totally enjoyed it as well.
Yeah,
it's just
a pleasure.
I like doing these podcasts like this because it just feels like you're just having a normal conversation in a room. And
I was told a long time ago. I've done a lot of presentations for trade and actually many people about our product and my chosen craft over the years. Yeah. And somebody said, just think of this as a conversation with like-minded individuals, and that has been perfect today.
It has. Perfect.
It has. Nice and relaxed and just open conversation.
The only way it could have been more relaxed is if we've done it in the pub.
Exactly.
So thank you everybody once again for listening, and join us on the next Composites Cast Monthly.
Yep, and thank you, David, for coming along.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bye everybody.
Composites Cast Monthly was brought to you by East Coast Fiberglass Supplies, the UK's favourite composite supplier.